Hello and welcome to a Community Voice Short. On today's show, we're going to be learning about the 2011 Conscious Birth Summit. And we'll be sitting down with Kristin Bergman, who is a local doula and a midwifery activist, as well as the organizer of the summit. Well, Kristin, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Katie.
So the Conscious Birth Summit is an annual event. I think when people look at the title of that event, they might wonder, what does that mean? So give us a little breakdown here.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's interesting, actually, the title. I took some feedback from a few people when I was first talking about it, and this is the 5th annual, so it's always been called the Conscious Birth Summit. And I guess the major intention is just to help parents make more informed choices about their birth plan and how they're able to give birth. And so I'm wanting to raise consciousness for people who are eminently going to make those choices, but I also wanted it secondarily to be a place where practitioners could share their experiences. So, you know, one of the things that I find is that there's a big disparity of care in our state between home birth and sort of the midwifery model of care, maternal health care, and what's happening in hospital, more industrialized kind of birth. And it seems unfortunate to me that in hospital birth, many times the practitioners haven't been trained at all in natural birth. They know a lot about problems and technology, and that's great when you need it, but for someone who wants to attempt a natural birth, it seems that we could share the expertise more across the board. So that's the idea of having this community conversation.
Well, this idea of a birth plan might even be foreign to some people watching the show today. And so I'm having my second baby here, and so I didn't know what a birth plan was until I encountered encountered that idea for the first time. And of course, a birth plan is just kind of looking at all of the options that might be presented to you along the way of the birth process and kind of deciding what course of action you would like to take. And so, of course, if you're doing a home birth or a midwifery model versus a hospital, those options are going to be quite different. And I think one of the things that I discovered as I was making a birth plan was that that some of the choices that were being presented to me were just things I absolutely didn't want to have to go that way unless it was absolutely necessary, and other things were closer to my heart and really felt like more like what I wanted to do. And so as I was looking at the options of the events, actually, the Conscious Birth Summit, I thought, wow, this is really a great way to kind of explore a lot of the things that you might be confronted with in the actual birth process.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes from an expert in one of the films that we've shown in the past was that people actually do more research when they buy a car or a stereo than they do in planning for the birth of their child. And I think one of the reasons that it's this dialogue is sort of missing in our culture has to do with the history of medicine in the United States only as far as obstetric care goes. We went through a period, the 30s through the 50s, sometimes into the 60s, where women were giving birth completely unconsciously. They were out cold because that was their medical choice. And since then, obstetricians, practitioners have learned that that's not the most helpful, that a mother needs to work with her labor, and so they've created anesthesia where a woman can be numb just from the waist down and still be sort of coached to push.
And a machine will tell them what they're feeling as opposed to them actually feeling it.
Exactly.
Right? Which is still kind of a separation, but you know.
Yeah, it is. But what the thing that I think that's interesting about the cultural progression is that in the history of humanity, you probably would look to your mother or your aunt or someone to talk about how she coped with the challenge of giving birth. And in one generation, we sort of lost that legacy of emotional knowledge and psychological coping devices. And so I think that we've lost a lot of how empowering and how wonderful birth can be. Even though it's difficult, there's a lot that's been lost that I think more and more people are interested in recovering.
Yeah. It's now this actual event at the it's happening at the library. Okay.
Our city public
talk
library.
a little bit about some of the events throughout the day things that people will have an opportunity to learn about?
Yeah, thank you. We have mental health practitioners who are leading a few different topics. The first one is part of a mindful birth course that happens at Heartland Yoga, and where they're talking about issues of mindfulness, but also really working with the body. So mind-body therapies. It's titled Embodying Pregnancy, and so she's talking about all of those issues surrounding your mental state as well as your physical state, and how to make an optimal plan and preparation for birth. We also go the gamut through, well, there's one particular course that is specifically for hospital birth, but trying to bring in some midwifery tools like squatting while you deliver, and using the bar that they have that comes for the hospital bed to facilitate this natural delivery more in the traditional style that human beings have been giving birth for a long time.
As opposed to reclining.
Exactly, yeah.
So a lot of this is about learning about the birth process, and sort of what naturally has happened before medical intervention came into place. Okay.
Yeah, so it's definitely geared toward people that are interested in natural delivery and the safest possible delivery, because statistics around the world show us that the more active a woman is in participating, the better outcome for her and for her baby. And not just for the birth itself, but that crucial postpartum period when it comes to nursing and recovery and bonding. So yeah, so we have different movement classes available. We are offering as well this year, something that's new that I'm really excited about, is a community talk about stillbirth, because that's another issue that there seems to be some invisibility in our culture. People don't necessarily discuss, and then there's this lack of emotional progress, I think, on a social level, and that's still very common in all kinds of birth. So I'm happy that we're talking about, great outcomes as well as difficult outcomes, and the more things that we can do as a culture to support women and new fathers and young children. So.
Well, that's wonderful. Whenever grief comes into play, there's fear.
Yeah.
People are afraid of grief, and so when it comes to stillbirth, that's especially hard. So that's really wonderful that you're looking at both of those subjects.
I'm just honored of all the different people that have come to me now that they are familiar with this event, that want to participate on some level. And it's true that I've been working with birthing women for a long time, and everybody loves to talk about their birth story, but they don't often feel they have the opportunity to do so quite enough. So.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the midwifery movement in the state of Iowa. I think a lot of people would be surprised to find out that there's other states where midwives are licensed, and there's birth centers, and out-of-hospital birth is just one of the options available to them. But in the state of Iowa, we're finding that there's a lobbying group, Iowa Midwives. What is
Friends of Iowa Midwives?
Yeah. So what is that group trying to accomplish?
Well, they have written a bill that actually during the last legislative session got very close to being proposed, and then lost its chance. So the momentum is there, and we're ready to make this proposal. And the legalization of home birth practice would not only safeguard people who are already offering this service, but it also would give more opportunity for others to offer birth center, as you said. So their care providing outside of a hospital, and at this point, when someone chooses a home birth, insurance won't cover it, and there is less integration of care. If they do need to transport to the hospital, we don't have systems set up for those care providers to share information with each other. And so one thing that I think is really fascinating and important is that there's a huge cost benefit. The states that they have legalization, home birth is much less expensive. Also, just well woman care. It doesn't even require necessary pregnancy, but there are midwives who are trained to offer care in more rural areas, There would be much more access to good prenatal care if we were to legalize this specialized practitioner's work.
Oh, and well, and in a state like Iowa, where you know our hospitals are definitely centralized around urban centers, I imagine that there's a lapse of care in rural communities.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. That women who would have to drive an hour or more because their only option is Iowa City often miss their prenatal appointments. And even if we were to, even if they were planning their birth at the hospital, their follow-up, you know, during that crucial period, that first year, could all be done more localized by people who are trained specifically in maternal health care and know very well when they need to refer to someone who has a higher level of training.
Yeah, and so often that care after having the baby, you really kind of walk in and you say, yeah, I'm doing good, baby's doing good, and they kind of look everybody over and you go home and you say, well, that was easy, so I can see why that could easily happen in the home. And if there's something, you know, like postpartum depression or physical problems that are coming up, a midwife would be trained to deal with something like that.
To identify it and then refer if it's out of the scope of her practice. And another thing that's wonderful about a home birth is that you get your follow-up care in your home as well. So if you're just trying to learn how to nurse or, you know, get through some of those early stages, that to have someone visit your home, which is really the model that is happening all over Europe and Japan, again, where they have much better health rates for their infants and mothers.
So we've kind of talked a little bit about why someone might choose a home birth, and I actually chose a home birth with my first baby, and I'm choosing a home birth with my second baby. And I've encountered a lot of people who say, you know, why would you do that? Why would you take that risk is usually the question. And I'll let you answer. I'll let you answer why someone might choose.
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough that with my first, when I chose a home birth, I was living in the state of Colorado that had legalized home care. So I knew that my primary care provider could transport to the hospital with me, and everybody there knew her. And even if I changed my mind, it just felt like during labor I wanted to be there, that would easily happen for me. But what I have found since becoming a doula and actually attending births in hospital is that I think it's much more challenging to actually accomplish a natural birth in the hospital. Again, the thing I was talking about earlier, the training in natural birth, one of the major things that's required is patience. We know more and more from neuroscience and neonatal psychology that it's actually the baby's system that sets off, emits hormones when they are ready to be born, that really gets labor progressing in the way that it needs to.
I didn't know that. So injecting a mother with Pitocin and stimulating her body to go into labor that seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Then, if it's the baby that's dictating the process.
Right.
Interesting.
Induced labors often are much longer labors, and the work that the mother's body's doing isn't as productive when there isn't this whole conglomeration of neurochemistry involved between the mother and the baby that facilitates an easy process. And yeah, when infants come into the world and they're not quite ready to be there yet, they tend to have a lot more complications and more failure to thrive. And so it's interesting, you know, I don't blame the Western system. I think it's, in a sense, still recovering from decisions made even 100 years ago. We were the only country that didn't invite midwives who were doing all of the births in homes into hospital to consult the hospital at the time that this shift was happening. And as I said, other countries that sort of integrated that old experience with the new have had a much more successful time of it. So yeah, I wanted myself, my freedom to move the way I wanted to be in the comfort of my home, to eat the food that I wanted to eat. And you know, a big part of opening yourself to your child, I think, is not being inhibited. And it can be kind of tricky not to feel inhibited with a lot of people you don't know coming and going at unpredictable times. So that's why I chose home birth.
Well, you know, this is obviously a very complex issue that anyone interested in having children would find this Conscious Birth Summit to be quite interesting. And so, I'm excited that Iowa City has this forum, and I hope that we keep this discussion going forward. And thank you so much for sitting down with me today. And the Conscious Birth Summit for 2011 is taking place on January 15th at the Iowa City Public Library. We're going to put the information up on the screen so that you can find out what's happening throughout the day. And thanks again for sitting down with me.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Community voice.
Iowa City is Iowa City is Iowa City is Iowa City is